Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and we are working on our Tannenbaum sew along, and we are at class number 2, which is our half square triangles. My daughter and I have owned and operated a busy quilt shop in Washington State for over 20 years. We have a retreat center, an active YouTube channel, and a large pattern line featuring our creations. My 2 sons work on machines. One daughter-in-law is our videographer and the other is a long-arm quilter. We are a family that love each other, we laugh together, and every once in a while we get some work done. We have a crew that are saints for their efforts at keeping us on track. Thanks for joining us on our wild ride. All right, hopefully you guys saw class 1 where we talked about gathering all of your fabric together and doing some pre-cutting. So you do need the pattern, and we're going to be working on actually block number 1, which is our half square triangles. If you've done all of your pre-cutting, you have your stacks, you have 5 of your background, and then you have your greens, mixed greens. So if you're following along, I'm just going to show you a couple little tricks when we're piecing our half square triangles. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about marking utensils. So whenever you're marking on fabric, you do have to make sure that you have a fabric appropriate marking utensil. So do not use ballpoint ink. If you're using ballpoint ink, what will happen is it'll end up kind of migrating across the fabric. It kind of gets everywhere. It really doesn't wash off. Even if you feel like you're drawing a line where you're going to be cutting, you know, you just don't have any control over that glob of ink that's setting on the surface of your fabric. So it is okay to use a lead pencil. Keep in mind that if you use a lead pencil on the top of your fabric where it's visible, you'll have to remove it. You can remove it with soap and water or with an eraser. Your other option is to use a chalk pencil. Chalk pencil comes in blue, pink, or white. Usually I only use the white, and that's just on dark fabrics. But the other thing I want to show you is a friction marker. I use a friction marker all the time. People have talked about friction markers and that sometimes they've had some bad experience. I think a lot of it depends on where you get it. Do not get a knockoff brand. The Pilot brand friction marker, we sell them on our website. I can tell you that not one single time has it done anything that it's not supposed to do. What happens with it is it makes a little mark that will go away when you iron it. But it leaves this tiny little residual mark, and that little residual mark will go away as soon as you wash the quilt. But up until you wash the quilt, if your quilt gets to 17 degrees or colder, that mark will come back. It's totally no big deal because then you just iron it again, you wash it, it all goes away, it's no big deal. But it's nice because that little residual mark that's there, I use that sometimes when I'm on dark fabric, and I'm going to show you in just a second. This fabric, the way that you, or this pen, the way that you want to think about it is if you remember those decoder pens that we used to use when, at least when I was a kid, you would write with one marker and then somebody else had kind of a highlighter and they went over the top of that mark and it magically appeared. That's what the technology is in this marker. So again, I'm just going to demonstrate it really fast. If I mark on this, which is what I'm going to end up telling you to do in just a minute, but let's just do this. I'm going to take the wrong side of one of my squares. I'm going to take this blue. Comes in lots of different colors, and I'm going to make a mark. I can see that mark just fine, right? I can see that. I hope it's coming through on the camera, but I can see that mark and I'll be able to make my line or make my sewing line. This dark blue though, this might be a little bit difficult. Maybe I have a white chalk pencil or maybe I don't. Maybe I only have this one. Well, let me show you a little secret. When I do the same mark, even me standing close right here, I cannot see that. But I'm going to come over to my iron and I'm going to just iron it. I'm going to bring it back. Whoops, sorry. And now look. That's that funny little gel that I was talking about. It's just that little, think of that as that highlighter. And so what'll happen is as soon as I wash this quilt, that gel will go away and the mark will never ever come back. But if in the meantime, this, I don't know, spends the night outside in the car or is shipped up to Alaska, that mark's going to come back. But that mark isn't going to do anything. Eventually it's going to go away as soon as we wash it. But what I like about that is now I have a mark that I can see on a black fabric, and it's a marking utensil that I trust. So I feel 100% confident with friction markers. And again, people that have told me horror stories, they are not markers that they've purchased from us or a reputable company. So don't get a knockoff. All right, what you're going to do, and the directions are pretty clear, you're going to look through your greens and you're going to mix up your greens. You're going to stack these together, right sides together, and you're just going to mix them up so you have basically either a light and a dark, and you're going to put right sides together. So as long as there's a little bit of variation, so I'm going to put those two together. I'm going to put, oh, maybe this one and this one, right sides together. I'm just going to kind of stack them. So I'll do those, and my 5 backgrounds, I'm going to put those together, right sides together with greens. So I'm going to stack all of these together, and then we'll mark them. And you might end up kind of overthinking this a little bit. I would say don't, because it's not going to matter. You can see that when you actually look at the tree, all of those greens are all over the place. And so it doesn't really make a lot of difference. I ended up with, so we'll just fast forward here with music, right? Okay. So it could be that when you get done, you have something that is pretty similar. And when I look at this, these two pieces, pretty darn similar. The only difference is that this has a little bit more modeling than this one does. I could go back through and find two that are a little bit different, and in fact I might do that. And that's why it's nice to kind of stack them before, or it's not really going to matter a lot. Okay, so I have all of my stacks. Now what I'm going to do, what we already talked about, we're going to go ahead and draw our line. So what we're going to end up doing when we make a half square triangle is we're going to draw a line, and then we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch on one side, 1/4 of an inch on the other, and then cut that line. So you can just draw that line. The other thing is you could use a quick quarter ruler. I'm going to grab one for you. This is a quick quarter ruler. It looks like this. If you've seen Brianna's Tri-Dazzle video, she made all of her large 10-inch half square triangles using this. What's kind of nice about this is it makes all of the marks, so you don't have to worry about it if you're not sure about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So all you're going to do is line this up, and you can probably see the point of my corner is right there and right there. And so all I'm going to do and I always go back and forth with my marker just to make sure that I haven't made all that mark, only to find out that I can't see it. And then I'm going to draw my line. On both sides, so they look like that. So I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew on this line, flip around and sew back on this line. After I've done that, I'm going to cut it out right on that line. I can either do that by lining up my ruler and cut with my rotary cutter, or I could even use my scissors if I want to. After I've done that, I'm going to press them open and I'm going to end up with 2 half square triangles. I'm going to sew a couple of these and I'm going to come right back and show you. Okay, I have 2 that I've sewn, and I just want to show you that on my background, that is again the friction marker, and I went ahead and did my mark and then I ironed it, and you can see that I have that little sweet little white line that's right there. So all I'm going to do is take my smaller ruler. I'm going to line that up right on that line, right on those points. This is part of the seam allowance. It's far more critical to make sure that the sewing is accurate. If I get off a tiny bit with this cut, it's not going to be the end of the world, but so I'm going to do the same thing. Line this up right on that line. And same idea, I'm still putting down constant pressure, cutting, making sure I've made the cut before I move it. The worst thing I think when you're cutting is people that go back and forth, you end up sawing things and bad things happen. So put down enough pressure to make that full cut. All right, so I'm going to take these 2, and now we're going to talk about pressing for just a second. Typically with pressing, I do like a heavy iron. It doesn't really matter what brand. Shark is a good brand, Rowenta is a good brand, Oliso is a good brand. You can get a $20 iron that is going to work great as long as nothing comes off of the front. You know, if you start to have your Teflon coating coming off, sometimes that's because of an inexpensive iron. But I like a heavy iron. I think that a heavy iron does most of the work. And on your pressing surface, you can use all sorts of different things. I do like the wool mat. What's really nice about the wool mat is it kind of heats up a little bit, so you're almost pressing from both sides. So I kind of like that, but you don't have to go out and buy anything new for that. Whatever your pressing surface is, whatever your iron is, but if you're in the market for a new one, my recommendation is simply a heavy iron. All right, so what I'm going to do is I just like to set the seam first just to make sure that everything is okay. And then when you open it up, we tend to, let me put my glasses back on, we tend to press to the dark. So typically what I'll end up doing is I'll pick up the piece that I think is the darkest, and I don't know, in this case it's probably a little bit of a toss-up, and I'm going to pull that open, because you're not pressing like a shirt. What you're really doing is you're just making sure that that seam is all the way open. So you're not pulling anything, you're not distorting anything, you're just making sure that this is nice and flat. The reason for that is that if it's not, let's press one wrong. If you end up just kind of pressing, so let's just say that all I've done is I've just opened it and pressed it like this. I'm going to show you something. Wait, I probably have that in the wrong spot. So if I open that up, can you see that? See that amount that's right there? You might not realize that that fabric is in that seam until after you've sewn everything together. And if you've wondered why is this block so much smaller than this block, and let's take a look at that. Look at how we're off by 1/4 of an inch, and it had nothing to do with cutting or sewing. It had everything to do with pressing, because what's happened is that extra fabric is right there. So that's why pressing is also equally important. And so that's why I just add just enough pressure to make sure that this heavy iron using this edge is rocking that seam fully open. And if you've made kind of a bad little pressing job, I like just a little bit of best press or starch. I like best press better than starch because starch will end up oftentimes leaving a little bit of a residual, kind of a little residue, I mean, a little bit of white residue on there. So now that whole thing is pressed fully open, and so my block is the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and press these other two the same way. This block has my background block. And again, oops, I didn't set the seam, but that's okay. The reason we set the seam is just to make sure that all of our stitches are right where they should be, that there isn't any rippling that might have happened with the sewing machine, that's all taken care of so that we don't have a block that's immediately distorted. And oftentimes when I'm pressing, I just leave one in place and grab the next one. I can tell when I don't set the seam. All right, so I'm just going to do these for a second, and I'm going to show you. I'll do that to all of the rest of them, and then what will end up happening is we have something that we like to call dog ears. So it's just this tiny little triangle that's left over. It's just left over from the block. So I'll take my scissors, and I'm just going to sit ever so carefully and cut all of those off. Those are not necessary. Not only are they not necessary, if you leave them there, when you start to sew all of your blocks together, just notice that all of that bulk is going to be in your seam allowance and it's going to cause problems later. So you really don't want it there. So I would tell you that this is not an optional thing. You really do need to just take a second and cut all of those off. All right, that's what you're going to do. So you're going to end up doing the rest of that with all of the rest of your blocks, and that is it for your sew along for your first block, second class, all of your little half square triangles. When you have them all done, sewn, cut apart, pressed open, dog ears cut off, take that little bag that we talked about in the beginning, and put all of them back in there. You're not going to see these again until class number 9. Put them all in there, tuck them aside, because in our next class, we're going to do block number 2.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.